Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. British voters dealt Prime Minister Theresa May a devastating blow in a snap election she had called to strengthen her hand in Brexit talks, wiping out her parliamentary majority and throwing the country into political turmoil. With no clear winner emerging from Thursday's election, a wounded May signalled she would fight on. Her Labour rival, Jeremy Corbyn, once written off by his opponents as a no-hoper, said she should step down. In the aftermath of one of the most sensational nights in British electoral history, politicians and commentators called her decision to hold the election a colossal mistake and derided her performance on the campaign trail. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyse why things went so wrong for Theresa May and what the future has in store for UK politics. Joining me on the programme today are Ummu Salma Bava, Professor, Centre for European Studies, JNU; Neeraj Srivastava, former diplomat; Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times; and Kamal Mitra Chenoy, Professor, School of International Studies, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Salma Bava, I'd like to start with you, of course. What are the factors that influence these polls, do you think?
I think the biggest factor is Brexit. She wanted to strengthen her hands after, Cameroon, took Britain into elections. And so within a year, it was that majority she wanted to shore it up, went to polls, very suicidal, because it now means that she's on an extremely sticky wicket. I think there was, a turning around in terms of voter sentiment, in terms of how the Brexit was last year, June 23rd, precisely when, the people went to vote in Britain not knowing what they were voting for. And you could ask then this year, what was it? In some ways, the triumph of Labour is also about resetting the agenda in terms of what the Brexit negotiation will take Britain ahead in the coming exactly 10 days from now. On June 19th, the negotiations are supposed to open. So on a sticky wicket, we don't know what's coming. I think everybody is waiting and watching in the next hours as it plays out.
Ambassador, she took a major gamble and she lost. Political commentators have said that it's a blunder, it is a mistake of magnanimous proportions. Would you agree with that?
The point is that when she decided to call these elections, at that point the opinion polls were showing a 20-point lead for Conservatives over the Labour Party. So at that time she probably went by those polls. But this lead progressively got reduced, and with the result that according to the latest polls, the lead was reduced to 3 points or 5 points, something like that. So yeah, I mean, you can fault her and you can also excuse her depending on where you stand. Had she known that the lead was so narrow, I'm sure she wouldn't have called the polls. But she seemed to be overconfident. And I think it's risky and dangerous to be overconfident in politics. We have seen it in India itself happen, in some elections where the party thought that we'll win, hands down, and they were wiped out. So it was bad judgment, actually.
Was it also a case of the voter generally being fatigued with so many polls, year in and year out? 2014, the Scottish referendum; 2015, a general election; 2016, an election on, whether to stay in the EU or not; and then 2017, you have another election. I mean, at some point in time, there's going to be voter fatigue.
Sure, there will be voter fatigue, and you might have another election not far from this, because this is not a stable picture. Right now, she may cobble, a kind of government with the outside support of the Democratic Unionist Party. But that will be an unstable government because it will be a minority government. Also, the Conservative Party and the Democratic Unionist Party, they don't agree on all points. There are some points of difference, including regarding Brexit. The DUP, they want a soft Brexit. Theresa May wants a hard Brexit. So this government itself is an unstable government.
Sure.
And it may not complete its whole term. It's quite possible.
Fair enough. Kamal Mitra Chenoy, what seems to have changed over the last few months from having a 20-point lead to what the figures show us today? What has gone wrong?
Well, it's ironic, taking off from what the ambassador said. The Guardian and other sort of left-leaning papers were extremely critical of Jeremy Corbyn for not having stopped the election. They said it was just too much of a gamble. But I think what also happened was that, after all, there are a lot of news of Europe in England, and what was happening in Greece, what was happening in Spain, in Portugal, and all of that, made people rather cautious about what economic policy should be. Also, Jeremy reached to the old slogans: reduce tuition, increase minimum wages, renationalize the National Health Service, renationalize the railways. You know, that appealed to a lot of people. And yet it was on his ground also quite adventure, because no one expected that Labour would actually do as well as it did. And you know, if you look at the numbers, I mean, the Tories are with 316, as the ambassador said, 10 short of a majority, but they lost 12 seats.
Yeah.
Whereas Labour with 261 won 31 seats, though the Scottish National Party lost 19. So Labour really went against the mood. And now see what the Tories are saying. George Osborne, who's the ex-finance minister, he called the results catastrophic. And Anne Soubry, a Tory MP, say may have to reconsider her staying in office. So if, paradoxically, if Jeremy had not won well enough, he would no longer have been Labour Party leader, which would have given the Tories a huge size of relief, as well as the Blairites inside Labour. But now he is virtually unassailable, and Theresa May, if she is going to be, somewhat countered or forced to shift a bit by the DUP, they have very strong leaders. I mean, Ian Paisley may not be around, but they are very anti-Catholic, as they showed in Ulster. So it's not going to be an easy, cohabitation. And I think what people are saying is right. This government is not going to last very long.
Sure.
Because the Labour has tasted blood. Those against Theresa May, who were sidelined, inside the Tories, they're also going to be pushing. But in all this, the Brexit factor is not going to work the way any one party does. They will have to work out some kind of coalition to tackle that issue. Because it is clear that Jeremy
Corbyn... Some kind of give and take.
Give and take, but try not to give as much as Greece has done, or Portugal, or Spain, or those countries.
Indeed, fair enough. You know, Pramit, a lot is being said about whether or not Theresa May should continue. This clearly is a vote against Theresa May and her policies, and possibly even her Brexit policies. So, on moral grounds, should Theresa May step down?
I think anyway she's going to face a challenge because she took a gamble which the vast bulk of the parliamentary party of the Tory party, if they'd been consulted, would have opposed. She, I gather, consulted only a very small group of advisors in making this decision. And yes, she therefore held responsibility. And second, there seems to be a fairly strong set of opposition to the idea of a hard Brexit policy. Though you have a spectrum of positions, the Liberal Democrats, the Labour, possibly even the Democratic Unionists, all have a slightly different version of Brexit in mind. So yes, there's clearly an evidence that her hard Brexit policy did not go down as well as she seems to have hoped. And then finally, I think there seems to be a fairly strong evidence that she has a leadership problem. Britain faced two base crises in this election campaign. One was the Brexit negotiations, and the other one was terrorism. There were 3 terrorist attacks during the election, in the run-up and during the election campaign itself. The first major such attacks since 2005. And you would have expected that a Tory, this is the party of national security, Corbyn has no standing or has no credibility on national security issues. And she was a former Home Secretary. We would have expected that she would have cashed in on this, and she couldn't. She was didn't damage her in the polls, but curiously enough, she wasn't able to come out with a sense. She didn't win over any extra voters on the security platform. And finally, her own campaign was quite dull. She refused to debate with Corbyn. And in the one interview that she gave, it cost her 3 to 4 percentage points in her polls, indicating that her answers were quite dull and poor. So as a consequence, yes, I think she can't really continue to rule her party or lead her party with credibility. And I would expect sometime later this year or early next year, not immediately, there will be a serious leadership challenge within the party on this issue. And this will be particularly true if the Brexit negotiations, as I expect them to, become extremely difficult, because the European Union and Germany in particular are very determined that Britain must be punished for its decision to leave the European Union.
Sure. You know, I'm going to go back to a point that Kamal Mitra Chinoy was making earlier, Salma Bava. You know, do you believe that the circumstances in Europe, you know, considering what has happened in France, Spain, Portugal and elsewhere, do you believe that all those factors had a bearing on the UK polls?
I think, you know, there was a big mood build up in politics from January this year about whether European politics is moving extremely far right of the center. And concern was building right across through Netherlands, you know, and then you had France. And then, of course, September is the elections in Germany. And then there was some kind of a course correction has been seen. And of course, those do cast a long shadow, because it meant that across Europe, you've seen a vote for the European Union, not a vote away from the European Union. So it means that, yes, the mood in the European Union or rest of the 27 is definitely that we want to, you know, go through Article 50, this negotiations with Britain in a systematic manner. But Britain should also realize that, you know, you don't leave a prestigious membership and then negotiate your terms at, you know, how you will get it. But there are also extreme other major concerns on both sides. There are more than 3 million, you know, so-called EU nationals working in UK, and there are more than a million plus British citizens working in EU. So, you know, there's also this give and take about rights, about who gets to do what, you know, issues which impact family, your mobility and all of it. And of course, in all of this, you know, the elections, it's also about the economy at the end of the day. And London's own very cherished position as being the financial capital. All of that stands a big question mark now. You know, I mean, everybody here has pointed out two leadership. So it's leadership within. At the end of the day, if there was a winner in all of this, it's about democracy. It's that if you read the mood of the people wrong, then the people will really vote and tell you that, you know, why you can't jeopardize everything that they stand for. So I think it's a big course correction in UK politics. The Labour was almost, as Kamal was pointing out, almost written off, and they're back with a bang. And for the Tories, it's a point of reflection. But how do they head into the political storm brewing ahead in terms of negotiating what would be good for Britain? Scotland has again, you know, there's going to be some kinds of reconciling with the outcome. But also the fact that instead of getting a majority to negotiate an outcome, a coalition is the saddest way in which you negotiate in politics, because it means you come down to a common minimum denominator.
Yes.
And that would really make it hard, you know, as everybody in the panel has said, there are strong leadership issues. If she took the party into elections and did not get even a simple majority, does she have the moral right to even continue to form a government and then lead the government into negotiations? So it is something where I think everybody in Britain, within and outside, are asking that, you know, how will Britain get out of this situation? Will the Queen really agree to this? Does she have choices? Or will it be, you know, the others are going to wait and watch and see? But definitely, all of this is going to have an impact on other election agendas.
Sure. Indeed. You know, as far as Brexit is concerned, Kamal Mitra Chinoy, you know, do you believe that Europe is now going to come back to the negotiating table and maybe try and negotiate some kind of, or broker another kind of a deal as far as Britain entering the EU is concerned? Or do you think that that chapter is closed now?
No, I think they would like England back. But the problem is the terms are going to be stiff. I mean, even Germany, for example, because of Angela Merkel's, you know, almost slogan, what she promised, that we'll take 1 million refugees. really boomeranged. And so there is this combination of austerity plus immigration in large parts of Europe, which is going to make their governments more stiff. If you remember, when this first package came for Greece, one of the conditions was that there will be no political interference in the economic structures and functioning. So these are hard conditions. And as Ummu has also said, I mean, England is going into discussions with a divided house on a weak wicket. And I mean, if they're going in, do they think they're going to get better terms than they would have got in the EU? Because after all, England being a financial capital also means a lot of finance is invested in Europe.
Sure.
So I think I was there when Brexit was taking place. And to me, really, it seemed a combination of austerity plus immigration. That was what the vote was really about. But when you want to renegotiate, that doesn't then count. And so I think what Theresa has probably unwittingly done is, instead of having a strong negotiating base, she has created a weak negotiating base. And I think that will have reverberations in our party.
Fair, sure. I mean, I think that's very well summed up as far as Brexit and what's going to happen with that is concerned. But Ambassador, I want to talk to you about what this means for India, really. Is it going to change anything? Are these polls going to, change the way India deals with the UK? How is that going to take place?
I really don't think that is going to have much effect on relations with India. For one thing, I mean, the Conservative Party will still be there. Theresa May, to begin with, will still be the Prime Minister. We don't know what will happen after a couple of years. Something she may change. And there is, I think, a general consensus in the UK about relations with India. There are no very divisive issues on which there is great difference of opinion or approach. So I think as far as relations with India are concerned, I don't see much change in that happening.
Sure. Pramit, as far as Jeremy Corbyn is concerned, do you believe that he has an outside chance of forming the government, really, or do you think that that door is closed for him?
Well, nothing is nowadays, as Harold Wilson said, a week is a long time in politics. The Tory position remains still relatively strong. They're not. Their vote share, for example, has barely budged. I think it fell only by about 1 or 1.5 percentage points. I think the real issue for Corbyn is that, as has been mentioned earlier, his leadership of the Labour Party is now unquestioned. And he will almost certainly lead the party into the next general election. I think for him the real question, or for anybody in England, is how long will the present Tory government last? Will it be able to actually finish its full term? I have my doubts. Not only is it a minority government, but it is about to enter into very complex negotiations with a relatively shaky mandate. In fact, it doesn't really have a mandate at all. And therefore, as the negotiations progress, I would suspect that they will get either stuck on 1 or 2 major issues, or even if they are completed, the government will have to go back to the electorate for some stamp of approval, which would seem to indicate that this government will have to go back to the polls well before it completes its term. It was just the build-up to the Brexit negotiations led May to decide to hold this election 3 years before her government actually finished its term. So I would suspect that this is not a government that will necessarily last more than maybe 1 or 2 years. Therefore, that would be Corbyn's opportunity, if you wish, to push forward both a vision of Brexit that is different from the Tories, a softer or at least a more moderate Brexit. The Labour Party has talked about a customs union. They've talked about maintaining the European Convention on Human Rights, potentially staying within the judicial structure of the European Union, and maintaining the workers' rights and environmental programs of the European Union, all of which the Tories have been threatening to rip apart. So that would allow him to potentially become a prime minister if that has more resonance with the average English voter 1 year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years down the line.
Sure, indeed. You know, it's that time of the show now where I get concluding remarks from all my guests. What next, Ummu?
Two things. I think leadership is going to be extremely critical, both for all the political parties and for UK in particular. You know, Corbyn himself has been extremely critical of the EU and the Brexit. So will he moderate his own position in terms of trying to see that those who have shifted to his side, especially we're looking at an age group of 18 to 24, he'll have to keep the momentum going. You know, if the ball should be dropped by the Tories, to be stepping in and then leading Britain on. For Theresa May, the afternoon is going to be extremely important. If the Queen should say yes, then can she lead and be successful to get a deal for Britain from Brussels, which will, it's not just about saving grace, but about keeping advantages for Britain and the door to the continent open. I think that's going to be important. For the Scottish National Party, I think it's at this point wait and see. And for the rest, it's all about, like, you know, the pound has taken a sharp fall.
Yes, the pound has taken a sharp fall, and that's something that they need to deal with
really,
immediately as well.
Immediately,
yes.
You know, I mean, I think of course it will course correct and come back, but I think all the other currencies have been nervously watching. Nobody has swung into it. But I think these are early days which are casting long shadows, which portends even, you know, not, you know, the air over UK is going to be really something which is going to be dark and difficult. And if the mood turns even more somber, then I think Brussels will be willing to give less, and a coalition government will find it very difficult to lead a country out, you know, and especially an economy out of the downward spiral. Because, you know, I mean, unemployment, the youth, national health care, you know, all of these issues are on the list,
sure,
which need to be addressed.
Indeed.
And so they are going to be extremely critical. Everything comes down to leadership and the ability to bite the bullet and take those decisions, whether in terms of, is somebody going to rise, and are we going to see more politicians' role, or are we going to see any statesman kind like behavior?
Indeed, indeed. It remains to be seen. Of course, the next few days and few months will show us exactly that. Ambassador, you know, I want to go back to a point that was made earlier about terrorism. I think Pramit was making that point. Do you believe that the attacks before and to the lead up to the polls had an impact on these elections? You know, the Manchester attacks, for that matter, or the London attack, and, you know, and so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, it definitely could have had a negative effect because people don't want such incidents, you know, in the country. And definitely it wouldn't have it helped the Conservative Party. The timing was very bad, you know, just a few days before these elections. So yeah, unfortunate. But one more thing which needs to be pointed out
yes,
is that about these both, you know, Manchester and London terrorist attacks, there was an element of blowback in it. That some of the people who were involved had also, you know, with the blessing of the government, been in places like Libya and Syria and other places. And there is a link, there's a clear link if you read the relevant literature.
Right.
So, I mean, the lesson for European governments and others is that, you know, when you do these things, then there could be a blowback also.
Indeed, yeah, indeed. Coming with Rachana, what's the lesson from this election as far as, you know, Europe and the UK is concerned?
Well, one thing on terrorism, you know, the Tories are supposed to be tough on terrorism,
yes,
on national security. And yet, under their rule, not only do three terrorist attacks take place, but a number of them are people who are of British citizenship. So that kind of blowback is very frightening for a country. It's one, having people come from the Arab world in, but to have homegrown terrorism is frightening. So I think that did hit the Tories, because national security is not a big slogan for Labour, but it is a very big slogan for the Tories. Second thing I'd like to say is, you know, in the last couple of years, the economic financial situation in Europe has not really improved.
Yes.
And therefore, there's going to be very hard bargaining. So in retrospect, I think some of these leaders will be wondering if Brexit was something that really helped them, or actually something that weakened them for the negotiations that had to come. And I don't see the European Union leaders are really going overboard to help Britain out.
Sure.
Because they like to put them in their place.
Indeed, and you believe that's what's happened as far as
And
this
going
is
to
concerned.
happen.
Yeah, okay, and going to happen as well. Pramit, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think that May will have two basic issues before her. One, she has to come to an agreement with the Democratic Unionists as to what her EU policy is going to be. Because keep in mind the Unionists themselves have a problem, which is that they want to have a soft border with Ireland, EU member. And so they will not necessarily like the idea of a complete break-off of the immigration or mobility agreements with the European Union. Second, then will be the question of her then developing a policy that will be able to, she'll be able to persuade the European Union to accept. And then finally, as I mentioned, the terrorism issue, she has talked about ripping apart understandings on human rights. And I think one of the areas the Tories are clearly moving towards, and it'll be curious to see how well they can get this accomplished, will be the issue of preventive detention. That there has really been an outcry that too many of the attackers in all these terrorist attacks are already on police watch lists. But because they have not actually committed a crime, there is nothing that the judicial system can do about it. So there clearly is going to be a move to try and do some sort of detention just on the basis of profiling rather than actual criminal acts. I think all those three fronts will be all of them would be a major challenge for any Prime Minister, and they will be particularly difficult for May after this election.
All right, on that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Ummu, Salma, Bava, Kamal Mitra Chinoy, Neeraj Srivastava, Pramit Pal Chowdhury. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. See you again next time.